Okay. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for being here through the prayers of Holy Fathers, with Jesus Christ, our God of mercy, and us and save us. Amen. Okay, so this has been, apparently someone commented on the Descent into Hell video, or the Western Rite video after, I guess we did our last show. So, basically, we're starting something new here, and I've been starting to take suggestions in the Discord. We're going to start doing this in other places where your requests, we're going to start looking at deep dive into these videos. We kind of did one a little bit ago. Good evening, everybody. And so we're going to go right into this. As always, I haven't seen it yet. So let's find out what's going on here. I'm going to put it at 125 to start, just so we can kind of, I assume that's usually the safest, where you can still understand people, but it's a pretty long video, so let's get started.
So the apostolic constitutions, which are constantly pointed at by members that hold this far out strict view, are really not talking about what they're claiming they're talking about.
No, Father Peter here is on the far end of that spectrum.
Hello and welcome to the Theoria podcast. Today I speak with Zach, who, along with his fiancée in the early 2000s, converted to Eastern Orthodoxy. But shortly after he converted, he got swept up in many old calendarist ideas and was a self-proclaimed rigorist for about a decade.
I'm going to stop this because I was actually talking to my matcha about this, and I mentioned the use of the term rigorist. Well, okay, I'm reading some of the comments now. I'm like, somebody said, and it's annoying voice, 129 of that is torture. Yeah, well, it is, but now he's going to get a little bit higher pitch. But the term rigorist is kind of like, what's the word we're looking for here? Again, as always, questions, comments in the chat. Good evening to everybody. I see you there, and I'm just going to, say hi real quick. And this term rigorist seems to have been invented just kind of to be able to slam people as traditionalists, because they don't want to say traditionalists because Orthodox believe in tradition. It's like the whole thing with perennialism. You don't want to say ecumenism. So if you describe it as a philosophical school, it sounds much nicer. But let's continue.
How did he get out of that movement, and what did it mean for him personally and spiritually? Well, we talk about that, but we also talk about a topic that is very much in vogue today, and that is rebaptism or corrective baptism. We cover a lot of material today, so buckle up and let's get to it. Zach, could you?
Just before we go any further here, I am going to note that this is kind of a new thing. So just so you realize, when you see a close-up of Ben's face, it's a lot smaller. Like, he looks like he's like staring me in the face full size. It's a little creepy, but okay, let's continue.
Could you tell me a little bit about how you came into the church?
Sure. Let's see. I was a young college student. I believe I was about 20 years old, and my then fiance and I were attending school at Marshall University in Huntington, West Virginia, and we were both, at that time, deeply committed evangelical, broadly speaking, evangelical Christians, although we sort of had sympathies with the Messianic movement. And, little pieces of church history would come into onto our radar by, various writers being mentioned in classes and, various.
I'm just going to pause for a sec, because just I'm noticing here, and forgive me, but that name sounds familiar, and I'm not sure why. So I'm just going to head over to Twitter and just quickly see if I recognize this person, or if they have me blocked. Or wait, what? Give me a second. Ortho Dad of 5. Maybe I'm doing something wrong. Ortho Dad of 5. Yeah. Huh. Well, that's strange. Okay, let's get back to the video. Like, maybe he just quit Twitter. A lot of people do.
Broadly speaking, evangelical Christians, although we sort of had sympathies with the Messianic movement, and little pieces of church history would come into onto our radar by various writers being mentioned in classes, and various societies. I remember taking an Islamic world history class, and talking about this sizable contingent of Arab Christians and who they were and what they believed, and it just really intrigued me, and it became lonely to be a Protestant, actually, when you're deep in church history. I think there's a famous Newman quote or something like that, like, to be deep in church history is to cease to be a Protestant. But it was lonely. I didn't find the commitments to the 16th century debating points in deep in church history. I became really fascinated with a character by the name of Saint Athanasius the Great, and I really loved that he one of his letters is one of the first outlines, at least in the East, of the full New Testament canon. And he of course was this stalwart confessor of the divinity of Jesus Christ, and I just became fascinated with his character. So along the way, we met some people. One of those people was a priest. I believe his name was Father Frank Milanese. He taught several classes at Marshall University. One of those was a church history class. His texts were things like the Art of Byzantium and Metropolitan Kallistos Ware's The Orthodox Church. I'd actually discovered it mid-semester, so I didn't actually take the class. I asked for his permission to audit the class, and he let me. And he mentioned later, he always has, every semester, there's classroom casualties that he, as he calls it, where people, find orthodoxy, they fall in love with it, and become Orthodox. So we began to study along those lines. Quickly sort of read my way into the church, but I had misgivings about it. I think one of the big things psychologically for mainline Protestants and evangelicals is, we gave up on ecclesiology very, very shortly into the whole thing, because we realized the Protestant movement as a whole was not going to stay together, and the exclusivist claims of orthodoxy were in a lot of ways really not troubling, but just difficult to swallow. And
the exclusiveness claims of orthodoxy were difficult to swallow. Why do I have a feeling this is going to play out further in here? But we're going to continue.
I remember we decided we were going to go visit the local Greek festival, and which is a big deal in Huntington, as it is in most places where it's held. And we met a monk there, an iconographer monk. We were commenting on the beauty of the church itself. He was just sort of sitting there, like, taking notes. I know he must have been overhearing us, like, in awe, especially of the beautiful Pantocrator icon up in the church's dome. But he didn't say anything, and later we found out he had actually been the one to have painted it.
Wow.
So he was, one of those people, just actually very deeply humble. And but I struck up a conversation with him. We were sort of going back and forth. I asked him at one, I sort of realized, like, the turning point where I realized, like, I don't actually have any good arguments against orthodoxy, was I just sort of, like, rapid fired at one point to him, and I said, "Yeah, but show me deification in Scripture." And without hesitation, he said, "Therefore you shall be perfect, even as your Father in heaven is perfect." And I, like, all of my other objections sort of just melted away, and I began an email correspondence with this monk. He had converted. He's actually since reposed many years ago, and but he was instrumental in being one of those personal contacts. That orthodoxy is this real thing. It's not just a set of ideas or propositions to refute. It's a living community. This very Greek community embraced my wife and I, and we loved it. So we began our courses of catechism with Father Frank, and were received into the church, incidentally, on the feast of the translation of the relics of St. Athanasius the Great, May 15th on the new calendar, and May 2nd on the old calendar. So we didn't actually choose that. Father Frank, just that worked for his schedule. And we were married. We were, it was like a series of sacraments right in a row. So we did, we had our lifetime confession, our chrismation, our marriage, our first communion, and everything else, all in sort of a whirlwind of about 8 days in May.
Oh, wow.
That's actually standard for receiving converts, whether it's by baptism or by chrismation. Usually things like weddings and stuff are usually done pretty much immediately afterwards. So right now I'm not hearing anything shocking. So I imagine it's coming.
Yeah.
Wow. Wait, so when you joined the church, were you already married legally, or did you get married when
That's right.
when you joined, you got married?
Yes,
Wow.
that's right.
That is amazing.
Yeah, no, it was such a gift to sort of have been on the cusp of marriage anyway, and to have found orthodoxy at that point.
Beautiful.
Yeah.
So walk me through the next couple of years, if you don't mind. You have this whirlwind of joining the church, getting married. You're basically taking all of like 4 out of formally the 7. Of course, we don't. Anyway, walk me through the next couple of years. What happens? What's going on?
Well, very early on after chrismation, Father Frank is actually at that point transferred. The Diocese of Pittsburgh needs him elsewhere. Another wonderful priest comes. He's a very good man, and we're still in college. We're now just poor married college students, and which I actually heartily recommend. There's nothing like a wife to help you hit the books and basically keep you on task. At least for me, that's been the case. And so let's see. That summer, our honeymoon summer, I found the biography of Father Seraphim Rose, and I read it to my wife that summer, the entire biography, and it was the new one, not the contentious Father Gleb Podmashensky one.
The one that has the mentions of various true Orthodox struggles with the Rokor, the edited version.
Father Damascene, Serbian,
Yes.
approved one. But, it really sort of gave me a taste for, sort of a rigorism. Although at that time, I ignored the very common sense, very spiritually mature advice of Father Seraphim himself, who often spoke against super correctness as much as he did against, spiritual relativism. But
and that's something that I think is important to draw out for the listener here, that if you read his life and all of his works, I believe I've read all of his works. In any event, if you read it with a certain lens on, you can see one thing. And if you read it with another, or maybe with an open mind, you can see another thing. So it's not...
Or if you read an edited version, you can read another thing.
As cut and dry as people think. I happen to really have a great love for Father Seraphim Rose. I don't, just as I have a great love for St. Paisius, I just don't particularly care for how he's been utilized in certain contexts. But please, go ahead.
No, that's a very good, and I don't mean to also follow down a rabbit trail here, but I will say, I think we often treat writers as though, and Orthodox saints and is in particular righteous, even, as not yet glorified, but we sort of treat them in a static way when their own spiritual lives, their own understanding of things can be developing over time, and often is.
Yeah.
With Father Seraphim Rose, the late, when I began to study it sort of later, in another context, I realized that, for instance, in his letters, which are actually published by a completely different source, to his spiritual son, Father Alexei Young, I believe, tonsured with the name of Father Ambrose, it reveals a growing disillusionment with the extremist Greek old calendarists, and an implicit trust of the, tried and true, Russian church methods of everything. But
I'm becoming increasingly convinced that the more I've seen of Father Seraphim's personal correspondence and so on, that a lot more of this description of Father Seraphim becoming disillusioned to Father Alexei and later Father Ambrose Young might actually be more the creation of Father Alexei, now Father Ambrose Young.
Yeah, so I read the second book by Father Seraphim Rose that I read that summer was Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future.
Yeah.
It was sort of that combination that I got bit by the old calendarist bug. I really went down that trail, and I read, everything that I could online. Old calendarism is extremely online.
I wonder if he read the edited version or the unedited version.
Probably maybe 3 websites per actual member, something like that. They're highly overrepresented on the internet. And,
yeah, I hate to say this, and this bothers me, because attacking our web presence kind of strikes me as silly. In the first place, half the synods, that I'm aware of barely have functional websites. It's every person. I've seen people even on our Discord who are like, well, can you get information here? And you've got to have like a photographic memory of the websites that we have that are operational. Like, I run NFTU, but NFTU is technically it's a church news website and an ecumenical news website, and now an apologetics site. But this claim that there's 3 websites for every old, this is just petty. It's petty and it's not honest.
The ecumenist excesses I began to be really paranoid about. The Greek metropolitan at that time of Pittsburgh, his name was Maximus. He had said, things that, because I'd only sort of imbibed this very rigorist, exclusivist, late Greek opinion about the complete emptiness of heterodox sacraments, that he was making claims like, well, the only thing really separating us from the Roman Catholics is, papal supremacy and the filioque. And, it's deeply scandalized me. I began to doubt my own reception into Orthodoxy. And
so when you were received, were you chrismated or were you baptized?
We were chrismated. I had received baptism in the Episcopal Church as an infant. And
I think, unfortunately, what he's experiencing is something that happens to people, and they do get scandalized, and that's an opportunity for them to find true orthodoxy. Unfortunately, we have no idea what his background. Did anyone catch whether he mentioned the background, the religious background? Because we don't know why he was chrismated. Unfortunately, in the Greek Archdiocese, that could be anything. He could have just, basically been given one of those. He could have jumped in a pool. We just don't know.
My wife had been baptized by her Methodist church as a 7 or 8-year-old.
Okay.
Sure.
And so, yeah, we asked about that. All of that was in the sort of the catechism and everything. And they told us, Father Frank gave us the level of understanding that we were able to receive at that time. And he just essentially said, well, the church by economy accepts your baptism, when you come in, and that, that was enough for us at the time. And the old calendarist movement and this sort of rigorist strain began to erode my confidence in the reality of our communion with the church.
As well it should. Here we are at the 20-minute mark of this review, so I'm going to take a mental break to see if I can process what we've just gone through. Quickly, I'm going to go through all the comments this time because I want to be fair. So we have the hello. We've got another hello. Hello to everyone, and everyone's talking to each other. It is a very interesting topic so far. I'm assuming it's going to get more exciting. Let me see here. And okay, a lot of greetings. Hello, everybody. And so we're getting through that. Okay, I'm putting that up again because I'm awful. And let me see here. Okay, waving. Yeah, he said he deleted Twitter. I said, wow, mentioned that. And Jason said he deleted his account. I am curious as to why. Yeah, this is true. When he said that you can read it with a certain lens, well, you can read a certain edition, the ones that are edited and take all the true Orthodox out. Yeah, totally agree. I want to say, because what I do when I need to find church websites, and if I know it's from another country, I'll type in their name in English, translate it into another language, and then I'll just move it to a different type of search engine. So when I type in Arpats in Yandex, which is now like News or something, basically it'll take you to, I believe it's rpac.site. But there hasn't been news since July. It's these are not running that great. It's a big bubble. You'll find OC content online if you search orthodoxy and the correct words. Yeah, it's kind of ridiculous. I took it personally when he said this whole thing with three websites per member. I might have 3 websites. Yes, that's true, but I think I'm special. I have a good feeling he's going to mention Gregory of Denver. Oh, if he does, that will be very interesting. Zach said he came from a Protestant evangelical background. Thank you for that, Sava. It makes sense. How much of Father Seraphim Rose's works were later edited? Well, more than I thought originally, even just a month ago, because I've seen revisions to the Life and Works. I've seen revisions to Orthodoxy and the Religion of the Future. And if there's other ones or more knowledgeable people in the chat, if they could just jump in and let us know. Let me see here. And we've got, what do you make of true Orthodox hierarchs commuting new calendarists in the past? I don't make much of it, and I'm going to be quite honest, because a lot of that was due to pastoral condescension. I think that situationally we saw that a lot, especially in the 1970s and the 1980s. The simple reality is a lot of the people on the ground floor, in the pew, not the pews, in the church, didn't really know a lot of what was going on. And frankly, there were a lot of really deceptive people who would say things like, "Oh, nothing's changed," and unless you were following, the Synaxarion carefully, you wouldn't know either. So yeah, it's absolutely, things like that have happened, but they happened for pastoral reasons. A person didn't know, confusion. It's not like, it wasn't like they recognized them. It was quite the opposite. It was to try to save as many people as possible. Sava says, not all, but a lot has been edited, and not Orthodoxy in the Religion of the Future, and his biography, Not of This World. Exactly. Do you know where you can grab a PDF of the original One Father? I believe on our Discord there's a link to it, if not a copy of it. If not, I'm sure somebody in the chat will be able to help, because I'm pretty sure at least 3 or 4 of us, at least in the chat that we know here, have seen it already, have read through it, have pointed out the discrepancies. So yeah, there are ways to get these earlier unedited works. And we're going to have to. It's obvious now that, they're literally going to lie about history. Well, Genesis, creation, and early man was edited. I don't know if it was. I haven't actually checked that one carefully. I wouldn't be surprised if it's not. He says it was edited. I'd be surprised, because most of that didn't deal. It mostly dealt with, Saint Basil's Oxymoron and surrounding patristics. It didn't really deal with like these church issues. It was about Genesis. So, but it's possible. Maybe they try to make him look like an evolutionist. Who knows? All right. With that, let's continue.
Wow.
And I'm certainly not alone in that. There are.
So when if you don't mind me asking, just to make a clarification here for people listening or watching, when did the Old Calendarist movement break off officially? Do you know that off the top of your head?
It's a really good question. Well, the State Church of Greece, as I understand it, adopted the new calendar shortly after the Pan-Orthodox Synod of 1923-1924 in Constantinople. The State Church of Greece. Okay.
Stop. The Pan-Orthodox Synod. We'll get to that. There are articles about that. It was not in any way, shape, or form a Pan-Orthodox Synod. After that, in the meeting of Vatopedi of 1930, the Slavs didn't even want to communicate with the Greeks. They didn't want to commune with them. They asked for a separate chapel.
Greece followed suit. It was basically pressure by the civil government. The formal break, though, they were very reticent at that point to establish.
Okay, we talk about the pressure by the civil government, but he's leaving out why the calendar had to be changed to begin with. But I'm curious as to whether this seems very carefully done.
Just separate hierarchy. A bishop came out of retirement to sort of shepherd the group, and there had been a sign in Athens on the old calendar, feast day of the Holy Cross. They talk about it a lot in their founding literature, because they look at it as sort of like God's blessing on this movement as a whole.
The word is miracle. It's a miracle.
It became fractured very early on. A monk on Mount Athos named Matthew of, I think, Vrestina, something like that.
Wait. Hold on. This is interesting. Okay. Is he trying to say the Matthewitism started when Bishop Matthew was a monk?
He obtained ordination and began to...
From who? He's trying to imply that the Matthewite Florinite split occurred earlier than it did. This is crazy. Okay, this is getting interesting now. So yeah, the history's all wrong. What he wanted to say was, when the old calendarists got a bishop, which would be Metropolitan Chrysostomos of Florina, 2 bishops came with him. They made Bishop Matthew a bishop. These were all united, and he's trying to pretend it's like some separate movement. Maybe he doesn't know. He knows.
He ordained another bishop, so that then they could do canonical 2 bishop ordinations to create a rival synod. But it was he who began the teaching that the adoption of the new calendar resulted in a complete loss of grace, mysteriological grace, by the State Church of Greece.
Wow.
I believe it was Chris.
Yeah, that's false. That's 100% false. In 1935, when the bishops of the True Orthodox Greece first had their synod, they, in response to the new calendar hierarchy calling them graceless schismatics, responded in kind. This is completely false. This is a misrepresentation.
Chrysostom of Florina. I could be wrong on that name, but I believe it was Chrysostom of Florina that sort of he was the one that was sort of shepherding the movement, did not want to make that claim. Later did under pressure in an attempt.
That's false. We already established he originally signed on to that, and the reason that Bishop Matthew broke off was because, as I've mentioned before, Metropolitan Chrysostomos had connections within the state church that were telling him they were going to revert to the previous calendar. Bishop Matthew didn't trust them, and that is why he broke off. This is really misrepresenting history.
Attempt to unify the movement. But yeah, it was sort of a gradual break, even as like the resistance movement happened. Much later on, there was lots of various rival synods of people and their nephews ordaining their nephews and creating these rival synods.
Now we're just mixing up history here. I realize what he's referring to with the nephews, like for example, Metropolitan Pavlos and Metropolitan Petros. Before him, that was his uncle, but he just kind of like dissolved it into nothing. In the first place, the Florinites were without bishops. We know this. The Rocor gave them new bishops, something they don't like to talk about. And then the factionalism that occurred with Callistos of Corinth, etc., and what created the Synod and Resistance. So there was technically no real resistance group until the 70s. Everyone held to the same ecclesiology of 1950, which was a restatement of 1935. So all of this is like a bunch of well-crafted deceits. That's the only way I can describe it. If this guy was a real true Orthodox, he has to have known these facts because they're very selectively chosen.
Synods and anathematizing one another. Became very fractured very early on, everybody declaring one another without grace.
Sure.
And Rocor at the time, this is according to Father Andrew Phillips, who was really well acquainted with sort of the history behind the movement. Rocor did not want to touch that in very early on. They were very hesitant about the canonical stance of the resistors, so-called, and certainly their own traditional view of the sacraments and ecclesiology did not endorse. Old calendar.
Okay, that's again. He's like, I don't know, kind of going off into a bunch of kind of just disparate facts that he's kind of melanging together. There were splits in the True Orthodox of Greece. Rocor was far more personally involved in what happened when they broke communion in, I believe, 1978, which is something nobody apparently talks about anymore. And then effectively, the idea that there were these large groups of resistors up until the collapse of the Callistos Synod, which is when Metropolitan Cyprian really took what was left of it and made the Synod in Resistance, the position of the True Orthodox Church in Greece was unchanged. And more importantly, it should be mentioned, the True Orthodox Church of Greece was celebrating in Jerusalem at this time. So the idea that they were like just trying to get further and further into isolation is just deceptive.
Rigorism unfortunately took the reasoning that was established, that was sort of created in the or given a lot of precedence in the Greek world of the 18th and 19th centuries. It took that to, I think, its logical conclusions in a really scary way.
Sure.
But
yeah, and of course, are you speaking more of like the council in 1750? Is it 50 or 60?
It was 1755 and 1756 that Patriarch Cyril V, without his synod, going essentially against all of the most authoritative quasi-ecumenical conciliar thinking at the time, and Archimandrite Ambrose Pogodin, I believe is his name. There's a great article online that discusses sort of unfortunately, the decadence of theological and canonical learning amongst, in that milieu under the thumb of the Sultan, and they'd reached some really extreme opinions. And,
right, and Archimandrite Ambrose, of course, is in the later 20th century, if I'm thinking correctly. Yeah.
That's right.
So like the 1990s. So where did all of this leave you?
I'm pretty sure Ambrose Pogodin is still alive. Hold on. This is not like a kind of a a long distance away. I mean, I lived through a lot of what they're talking about. So let me just see here. Let me see. Maybe he's not. Maybe he passed on. I mean, it has been 20 years. Let me see here. No, maybe I got to look more carefully. Okay. Anyway, let's continue.
And by the time of the early 2000s, this 80-year-old movement has gone online. It has spread like wildfire, even coming into what we would call canonical jurisdictions with insistence on old calendar kind of things. Where did this leave you in your early stages of being in the church?
You know, my search for the most correct, most canonical, most rigorous old calendarist church in West Virginia at the time was really fruitless, in the sense that I didn't find anybody other than this little Rocor mission parish and their monastery. And we fell in love with it. It was amazing.
Oh, good.
To me, it was, at the time when I joined it, to my shame, I really sort of considered, because of Rocor's communion at the time with the so-called moderate resistors, under the synod of like Cyprian, I believe, Cyprian. I thought, well, that's essentially us being in the old calendarist movement.
He's not wrong. It is.
I didn't know anything about anything yet, but I did find people there that also sympathized with the old calendarist movement. 90s Rocor was really this mix, and a lot of the convert parishes were they had a lot.
This is absolutely true. It was mixed. I unfortunately met both sides of it in my catechumenate.
Out of this like Greek old calendarist ideas. In fact, the priest who received us there, so we're just newly chrismated, and we like up and leave our Greek parish that we'd been attending for more than a year, because they were quote unquote ecumenist. I never heard anything from either the priest that catechized and married us, or the new priest that would compromise orthodoxy in any significant way. Was it a normal parish with like regular people? Yeah. And the Rocor mission was like this young, vibrant, they had crunchy moms and homeschoolers and head coverings and that kind of thing. It has it has the Orthodox aesthetic that you find in these places. And I'm not trying to mock that, of course. Piety is a really precious thing. And
of course.
And they loved us, they were also really welcoming, and we sort of fell in with that. But the priest there at the time, his spiritual father was sort of a Greek old calendarist. And he had advised, he'd had his wife, his Matishka, who had converted in the OCA by chrismation. He had actually had her baptized many years after. So he'd had her correctively baptized.
Yeah.
And
I am curious, did he have her correctively baptized, or did she just want to be correctively baptized? Because I feel I'm going to keep it quiet.
And, when we wanted to join, and we were at a vigil, we went to confession, and he asked us how we had been received. He asked me how we had been received. And when we said chrismation, he actually wouldn't even absolve me because he wasn't sure that I was actually validly in the church yet. So he wanted to go talk to the bishop.
That's a pretty hard line.
Well, he did it in a very gentle way. This is like one of the, at the time, it didn't make me feel anything other than, thankfully someone cares so much about our salvation, that they're not just going to, wing this thing. They're going to really go, and I was almost disappointed at that point in my own mentality that, he had conferred with the bishop, who had actually been the voice of common sense, and said, these people who were baptized already, they've been received by chrismation validly, and now they're confess and commune them and everything else. So that's how we joined.
Wow. So how long were you there? And also, what's this deal with corrective baptisms? I mean, we get.
Well, I'm a little. I must confess, I had kind of an opposite experience where basically I was told I had to be baptized in Rocor, and then I saw people who were received by chrismation and say in the Serbian parish who could commune there. The hypocrisy of it was obvious, and at the time I kind of felt like, I guess you got to keep it in the family and that's it. And, but the point is that there was nothing consistent. That's kind of shameful.
You got to get into that at some point.
It's, in retrospect, Father Seraphim Rose talks about it, and he is not a fan of the whole corrective baptism movement.
We know that's not true. He was obedient to the synod. We know that he wrote on the matter quite a few times. This is one of those points where especially new calendarists really like to kind of twist themselves in knots trying to figure out what he really meant, when what he meant was he would obey the synod's directive on baptizing heterodox.
There was a big group in Great Britain. that had essentially done that. There were priests at the time that would, travel to Mount Athos and come back baptized. Things like, anomalies were happening, but it was sort of and Father Seraphim Rose, I believe, in one of his letters, chalks it up to this sort of, I don't believe he uses the word scrupulosity, but it's that same mentality of needing to be sure. And he says it's not going to provide you.
I'm going to stop for a second because they're confusing two different things. When the priests started coming back from Mount Athos, etc., this was actually occurring in the 90s, well after Father Seraphim passed on. So he didn't have any comment on this. But this occurred as an aftermath of bringing in the evangelical Orthodox. And they were all brought in through, chrismation and then reordination, etc. But the point is, it actually caused enough of a scandal. It caused the Loch Lomond scandal. So if you want to Google that, you can. But the point is that effectively what ended up happening was that a lot of clergy, newly converted clergy, were going to Mount Athos, and the monks were like, "Oh, and where were you baptized?" And they're like, "Oh, I was baptized in this Protestant church." They're like, "Oh, well, we need to fix that." So they fixed it. So this is, believe it or not, this is actually not a true Orthodox problem. This is a world Orthodox problem that actually occurred and caused precipitated schism between Antioch and Jerusalem in America. It's a 90s thing, but it's there in the history.
With any sort of assurance that you're seeking, actually.
Interesting.
And really erode your faith in the church.
One of the things that has been taught on the internet, of course, is that there's a distinction here, that Father Seraphim Rose was brought in by chrismation, but that's an exception. And so in the exception,
nobody actually says that. Everybody says that Father Seraphim Rose was received in the way that Anglicans were received at the time. So this is a stupid argument.
There actually is grace filled, but I can't help but wonder, at what point do you recognize the chrismation, and at what point do you say, no, there's no validity there? So for me...
Oh, I can answer that. Give me just 1 second. Because apparently he seems confused by it, or what the Rocor's teaching was. But I can help him. If you follow along, and I'll put a link in the chat. Just give me a moment. Oh, okay. This is Ambrose Pagodin. That's not what I want. Alrighty. Let me see here. See, I told you I knew who he was. But anyway, where is 1971? Also contains the... Okay, so I'm going to copy this, and I am going to put this in here, and we're going to go right to those comments and continue on and have a mental break because we're at that 40-minute point. And so, again, I'd like to remind you that it helps to keep the lights on, so I'm going to include donation links. I didn't do that this time. I will do it next time. I'm terrible at everything I do. And so the link I just shared is this. It's from the Orthodox Christian Information Center. It's a resolution by the Roca Synod on the reception of converts. Now, this is Father Gregory's commentary, or Bishop Gregory's commentary, Father George's commentary when he wrote it, I think, if I remember correctly. And here's the resolution. It's at the bottom. And as you can see, the date on that is September 15th of 1971. It does talk about economy, and then it basically says that in the case of ultimately, unless absolute, necessity for economy or pastoral condescension, Roman Catholics and Protestants have to be received by baptism. That is very clear. 1971, if I remember correctly, the new rituals were coming out of Roman Catholicism also, and that was one of the things that is addressed by this resolution. Which is precisely that their forms have changed so much that they don't look like Orthodox forms anymore. So this isn't really a question. It's basically, if you're coming to the church and, you're under the age of 40, most likely you're probably going to need a baptism. It's not complicated. All right, so let's get to some comments, and then we'll get back to the video here. Let me switch that back. Give me just a moment here, and let's get to comments real quick. So, let me see if I remember here. If he compares it to Fatima, well, thank God he didn't. Max points out, should he be really trying to speak on the matter if he's unsure of one of the key names of the old countess in Greece? I was more concerned that he did know the names, but at the same time, he presented the history so distortedly. Like, I can forgive forgetting a name, but then to suddenly say that Bishop Matthew was consecrated by some secret group of people, no, he was consecrated by the same group of people. How does he not know ROCOR ordained GOC bishops? Oh, I think that. You see why I started to get suspicious? And then Max pointed out maybe it's just more naive, but I feel he's glossed over this stuff in his own journey too, instead of just deliberately being deceptive here. You're right, and I did say I'm a pretty suspicious person. That's okay. That's fair. Jason pointed out Father Ambrose Pagodin is not alive. I'm going to take your word for it. I didn't know him that well. I didn't know him at all, actually. I knew of him and I saw his writings. What version did they start to edit Father Seraphim's life and works? I have the 3rd edition. Somebody in the chat's going to have to correct me here. They actually have 2 different names. One of them is called Father Seraphim, his Rose's life and works, and the other one's called Not of This World. And please don't be mad, but I don't remember which one's the first one. But somebody in the chat, I'm sure, does. I apologize. Thanks for that. And here's the link to the article for the 1971 ROCOR instruction on the reception of converts. Let me see. Arthur Bradley writes, how much of a surprise was ROCOR's 2007 communion with the MP? Was there a surge in conversions to true Orthodoxy when it happened, or had it been telegraphed enough that if people who had cared had already jumped ship? Wow, that's a big question, and it's fair. Basically, what happened was it was between the 1990s and the 2000s, there was very little indication that ROCOR and the MP were actually going to get along. As a matter of fact, at times, things like the taking of Jerusalem properties by the MP was actually violent. And so, you literally had like MP people with the police trying to kick nuns out, like in Hebron. That happened, I believe, in 97 or 98. There wasn't, so I'd say that was a moment where a lot of people, and it was also the dawn of the internet. So a lot of people were kind of getting the information for the first time. And that's when I happened to convert to Orthodoxy. So I got to see this play out in real time. But what ended up happening was with the 2000 Council of the MP, when they decided to kind of write some, honestly, I'd say it was like half-hearted statements about, the freedom of the church and so on and so forth. And then they glorified selectively most of the new martyrs. They took some pot shots at ROCOR. But there were already a lot of people in ROCOR who were suddenly like, yeah, let's rejoin with the MP. And there were a lot of people who were like, never. And then, they had just started opening up free Russian parishes in Russia. And so thousands and thousands of people were joining. So, yeah, in that sense, there was a surge in conversions worldwide, especially in Russia and in other places as well. And ROCOR was kind of at the vanguard of that, and then just started kicking it away. Like they started just like, oh, the free Russians, we don't have anything to do with them. Well, you created them, you made their bishops, you registered their parishes. Now you're just like, oh no, you got to go. It became weird, and people started wondering if there was interference by Soviet or other government agents. And I'll be honest, there probably was, unfortunately. So the answer to that is yes and yes, because as each thing happened in 2001, there was the split with Metropolitan Italy, which they treated them so badly. But the point is, a good number of people left with Metropolitan Italy. A number of people left and joined ROAC, and then another number of people left in 2007. They kind of had advance notice. They knew what was happening. By 2006, the communion had been broken between the ROCOR and the old calendarists of the other countries. And so basically, by the time we got to 2007, they knew what was happening. They had already organized, and they just separated out. Remnant Roost watches. It's kind of painful watching this. I hopefully not because of me. But in any case, if I'm talking too much, just let me know. Ethan Wright writes, Craig Trulli in his Who Started the Great Schism video said that a sign of schismatics is that they always ordain new bishops where existing bishops already exist, and that the Catholics did this. Do you agree with him? And if so, did True Orthodox do this? This would be if that's Craig's position, and I'm really going to have to review that again. If that's his position, I don't understand how he could understand Orthodox history at all. That happened so many times. That happened so many times in church history that I can't believe it. There were different ordained parties during the Arian schism, during the Nestorian schism, during the Monothelite schism. Saint Martin, sent over bishops at the behest of Saint Maximus to go into Constantinople to regularize things. The same thing with the schism of the Johnites that Father Alexander Gatsopoulos recently pointed out. That even with Saint John Chrysostom, and that wasn't even based on heresy, that was just an uncanonical trial, started an entire hierarchy that fought back onto. I mean, if he really believes that, I don't understand how he could even read history, correctly. That's really, really bizarre. 1724 with the Melkite schism. I mean, I could go on. This literally happened throughout church history, and the Orthodox often were the ones that had to make new bishops to replace or to maintain, because sometimes with the imperial power, they couldn't get their sees back. They just had to protect the flocks. I don't even know how you can hold that. Okay, great. No problem. All right. And now that we've had a few moments to process this, let's continue.
I guess the question comes down to a bunch of different things. Look, if the baptism of heterodox is not valid in any sense, in any way, across the board as a monolith, then
nobody said that.
How do you have priests that were brought in by chrismation, and this would also account or apply to Father Seraphim Rose, who is a priest monk. Are their sacraments valid? Because you can't be brought into the church without baptism.
That's right. And, the more that I began to read on this topic, I began to sort of see the implications of it. It's a really dangerous rabbit hole. Father Peter.
It's really not a really dangerous rabbit hole. If you weren't given a proper baptism, you get a baptism. If you were given there's psychological reasons to allow economy. That's why the fathers allowed it. That's why you see it in the canons. So this is weird. It's kind of presenting this as some sort of monolithic kind of thing.
Peter Heers and I actually had a dialogue about it on his website many years ago, because in a way there's sort of a spectrum. I would say there's a spectrum on sort of both of the main sides, but the spectrum on the economic theory, I think Father Peter Heers, and I would love to hear him explain this more, but at least when he and I spoke on his website, he's on the far, far end of that spectrum. You can, so the sort of like the minority Russian economic theory by Metropolitan Antony of Kiev, and his
the first hierarch of Rokor he's referring to.
His student, Saint Hilarion Troitsky. Their view is, listen, the church has this power. It absolutely can use it, especially for liturgical Protestants, and for Roman Catholics and for Severians, the Monophysite communion. And, you're receiving these sacraments virtually, that basically under whatever sign of initiation that you received, under whatever sacrament of initiation, virtually is communicated to you the invisible grace of all the other sacraments that you would need. And, but they have, but they're still like, it's a much more open view to chrismation, into, receiving Roman Catholics even by confession and
No, it's not. This isn't true. The simple reality is chrismation, in many cases was common, particularly in the Russian Empire. No one's denying this, but the idea that somehow the Church Abroad's instruction in 1971, or what the Athonite monks was doing, was related to that, it's not. The liturgical forms of the West have devolved and denuded themselves over the past 50 years. That is obvious. To pretend that we're in 1695 or that we're all dealing with, baptized uniate Catholics is a lie. It's just not honest.
Abjuring of heresy and that kind of thing. On the very far end, some people say the Colivades fathers were this way. I don't really believe that. But on the far end, you find Father Peter Heers, who essentially says that those improperly received by chrismation. And to that, he quotes certain texts that would indicate the only forms that you may not repeat, you may choose not to repeat them if it's expedient for the church somehow to trick someone to believe that they've been baptized, even though you know they haven't, is to receive them. But the only form that you can actually do that and not repeat is one that is exactly like the Orthodox rite.
That's basically the Rocor argument in 1971, which is exactly what I've been saying over and over, except he's making it sound much more sinister. But just, I'm going to, again, share this, and I'm going to make it bigger. Give me a moment. And isn't this site's not a mobile site? Well, that's no good. The point is, it says at the end, having in mind this circumstance and the growth today of the heresy of ecumenism, which attempts to eradicate completely the distinction between orthodoxy and all of the heresies, so that the Moscow Patriarchate, in violation of the sacred canons, has even issued a resolution permitting Roman Catholics to receive communion in certain cases, the Council of the Bishops recognizes the necessity of introducing a stricter practice, i.e., that baptism be performed on all heretics who come to the church, accepting only as necessity arises and with permission of the bishop. I have to keep bringing back to that because they keep acting like this is some practice that was introduced like in some obscure session of something else, and it's not. Baptism was largely the norm, particularly among the Greek churches until the 20th century with the rise of ecumenism. And even then, obviously, Athos didn't go along with it. The true Orthodox didn't go along with it. It was, I'm just dumbfounded by the amount of footwork that the ecumenical movement has gone forward in terms of diluting the concept of baptism, but more importantly, how far they've gotten in convincing themselves and others that was always the position of the church.
No way differs. And so Father Peter Heers's position, I believe, and I would love to hear him explain this better if I'm misrepresenting him. I don't want to do that. Is that basically all of these inappropriately received people are not really baptized. They are not really baptized.
Because...
Well, I will say this. This was definitely not the way to publicly debate Father Peter Heers, considering that Ben Cabe is not exactly a great fan of his. So anyway.
Well, it is a rather hard line, and we know that he was brought into the church himself by chrismation, and then later sought a corrective baptism on Athos. But I don't know if his family did. His father, his mother. Now, I don't want to speculate there, so I'm going to leave that there. But I want to clarify: are you saying that on that far side, because I've read some of Saint Hilarion of Troitsky's works? So on that far side, you have Father Peter Heers and Saint Hilarion. Is that
no? I would say no. Roughly speaking, okay. Right. Roughly speaking, they're on the same division in the sense that they both believe that in any sort of heresy and schism or parasynagogue, in any of those categories, the mysteries are empty rituals. They're devoid of any sort of grace content at all.
Right.
Both of them do believe that on that end. And Saint Hilarion there is in the absolute minority of Russian fathers and theologians. And gets critiqued, on that on that particular.
I will say this because this is something that needs to be mentioned as well. The idea that the Russian church has always accepted people by chrismation is also an extreme and ultimately deceptive position. We know as early as the 15th and 16th centuries, they were receiving Roman Catholics by baptism. Even in Moscow, in the past 25 years, the Moscow Patriarchate has been receiving Catholics by baptism. It's not a uniform practice, and implying that it is also deceptive. We continue.
Issue. So
unrelentingly
right.
By Father Daniel. I just want to pull out some names here, if you don't mind. Sure. By like Father Daniel Sisoyev. How do you say his last name?
I would say it's Sisoyev. Right. Yes.
Sisoyev.
That's right.
Yeah, he had critiqued him, Saint Hilarion, stridently on a public forum, essentially saying that the opinion, and this is a direct quote, the opinion of Saint Hilarion that all the sacraments of the heretics are invalid is not based on the tradition and contradicts the spirit and the letter of the canons.
And
well, then he's wrong. I mean, ultimately, if you believe that heretics and schismatics have the grace of the mysteries, and I'm not trying to make it personal, I want to keep it as impersonal as possible because that's how the church views things, then you can't say something as simple as, we definitely aren't sure. We can definitely say the church's mysteries have grace, and we can't guarantee that the other ones don't. So this is not an honest presentation. And if Father Daniel really believed that, I don't know. I haven't read it, but if he did, he was just wrong.
Saint Daniel, Blessed Father Daniel, he graduated at the top of his class at Moscow Theological Seminary.
Worth noting that the Moscow Patriarchate does not recognize Father Daniel CSF officially as a saint.
This was a brilliant theologian, very deeply, he deeply venerated the Greek tradition. This is not someone that's just like, our Russian church says this. He was conversant in the Holy Fathers. He loved Byzantine chant. He was really familiar even with minor Byzantine canonists like Aristinos. I say minor. I don't mean minor. I have no idea what I'm talking about when it comes to canonists. I just know he's not.
Yeah, I was going to say there aren't that many of them.
Vlastaris, but Aristinos, actually, according to what I've seen, this canonical commentator, this Byzantine canonical commentator, also speaks of the validity of mysteries within heresies and schisms that don't alter the very faith in God itself. And that's sort of the sleight of hand, the rhetorical sleight of hand that rigorists use, the extreme rigorists, is that they employ the word concept fallacy. Heretic does not always mean what you think it means, and it really depends highly upon the contextual situation. So,
I'm just going to interrupt because I feel like, okay, I have no idea where they're going with this. A heretic is a heretic is a heretic. This isn't that hard.
And St. Basil mentions this, that in the apostolic canons, heretics are referring to people that worship a different God. The very faith in the Trinity itself is violated. In that respect, under St. Basil's category,
Well, I just wanted to draw that out because apostolic.
Whoa. Okay.
In the apostolic canons, which took place in 375, 380, we have a number of canons specifically that are usually drawn out. We have canon 46, 47, 49, and 50, which deal very.
It's worth noting that the tradition is that these canons came from the Holy Apostles, and that's not, putting that up like it's definitively from the 4th century is not just incorrect. It's kind of sinful.
Very strictly, even going so far as to say deposing a clergy member who has brought them in without without baptizing them.
Just admit you want to say rebaptizing because that's what you believe. You believe Protestant baptisms and Roman Catholic baptisms are valid. You're an ecumenist.
In all cases. And so what you're saying here, because I didn't realize this, but what you're essentially saying is that the category used for heretic in the apostolic canons is essentially non-Christian.
We're talking Gnostics. Yes.
Gnostics. Yes. Okay. So pagan.
We would not even classify.
I definitely would love to check to see if the commentaries of Nicodim Milash actually say heretic means pagan, because I would bet money. I would actually bet $10 that he is misinterpreting it, or they've gone to do that little slippery slope where it's like, oh, they meant Gnostics. Well, Gnostics were like pagans. They must have been talking about pagans. Gnostics were still heretics. So yeah, I don't buy this for a second.
Arians as heretics under that model, moderate Arians.
Interesting. So the apostolic constitutions, which are constantly pointed at by members that hold this far out strict view, are really not talking about what they're claiming they're talking about.
No, and you find this.
They're literally talking about what they're talking about. They literally list types of heretics in the canons that are treated differently because of similitude of form. The exact same same thing you're trying to argue is some sort of minority Russian practice.
This is really easy to find. I mean, this stuff. First of all, Saint Basil. Second, Saint Theodore the Studite. He even says the heretics that aren't like that actually still confess the 3 hypostases and employ the biblical formula for baptism are baptized. That's Saint Theodore the Studite. You don't get much more Byzantine than that. But sorry, and I sort of digressed here, but Father Peter Heers and I, when we were dialoguing on this, we were bringing up various examples, but he holds the view that he claims Saint Firmilian of Caesarea holds. And Saint Firmilian was an outlier.
In the 3rd century.
Right. Yeah. And Saint Firmilian is one of the only people we know to have essentially said, no. Everybody outside, it doesn't matter the form that you received. You've got to be brought in by baptism. And if you weren't, you are not baptized.
See, this is one of the problems that you encounter when you start dealing with situations that are not dealt with through the consensus of the fathers. What we're supposed to be understanding is why some fathers held to strictness on baptism in some cases, why some fathers held to economy on baptism in some cases, and then trying to figure out the why. By pitting them against each other, it creates a framework where you can start saying, well, this isn't really the truth, and this father was wrong, when instead we should be integrating them together in our understanding of the faith. And so this is part of the, I guess you could say, I don't think it's intentional, to be quite frank. I think that in this particular case, when you're talking about like these fathers having different views on baptism, they couldn't possibly imagine seeing these people celebrating in a church together. They think that they're this opposed, and they're not. So he's just wrong. We'll continue.
The church did not adopt that opinion.
It seems very clear to me that the case that is being made for this very rigorist, strict position is only taking into account certain things in a very non-nuanced, ahistorical manner. So before we go down the St. Firmilian rabbit hole, what I would love to do is pull out the strongest argument for the rigorist position. And I have some figures listed here, like we constantly hear about St. Cyprian of Carthage in 256, of course.
Are we going to go into quote mining? I really hope we're not going to go into quote mining.
One of St. Cyprian's primary teachers, not directly, but he venerated him, was Tertullian. So, and then the Council of Carthage in 257, which was chaired by Cyprian, held this kind of rigorous view, or at least this is what we're told. And then after that, St. Firmilian, and then Laodicea of 363 with Canon 8. Then you have the Apostolic Constitutions, which, as we've already talked about, is actually not a point that proves anything on the rigorist side, although they try to use it, because heretic actually means here Gnostic, pagan, non-Christian. And then you have to go all the way up to 1755 to get another person on this boat, and that's the Council of Constantinople.
Yeah, he's talking about the Oros of 1755, which they don't talk much about. Okay, well, it's been about, again, 20 minutes, so we're going to take this moment to clear our minds of all the bizarre stuff, and we're going to go through the comments. So, again, let me see here. I'm going to put on this handy banner on how you can help support the channel while I go through them. Okay, so Will Viking said, I would argue that the lack of ordaining bishops in the West is the source of Europe not being Orthodox in the 11th century. You're actually right, because any parties that were even remotely Orthodox at the time, primarily like the Libertines, etc., were killed off. So yeah, that's actually true. And then, in that sense, because of the fact this begins the process of Byzantine emperors negotiating with Hildebrandian popes to their detriment, which they would do repeatedly until the fall of Constantinople. Yeah, I want to say both of them are. I want to say both of them are poisoning the well. LOL. Yeah, well, I feel like, yeah, they are. Okay. I'll never understand why people put sacramentology into a dichotomy. Either left wing and accept all sacraments as valid, or right wing and claim only your church's sacraments are valid. Well, the reason is actually, here's the reason. It creates two pluses for the ecumenists. The first one is that means that you've got right or wrong. And in this case, the ecumenists are completely right, accepting all sacraments as valid. Now, obviously, true Orthodox don't always do that, because that's not the tradition of the church. But it creates a really good straw man so that people think that they do. Let's continue. Max says, I also find it amusing that the guest is way more charitable to Father Hears than Ben. LOL. Yeah, he is. Remnant Rue says, true. And then Max says, ironically, there's a very good video from Gregory de Capolite's channel with an excerpt from St. Hilarion reviewing the historical consensus. Yeah, because he does. Focusing on the Russian practice, by the way, it's part of a larger text. Yes. The idea of non-Christian, the way they use it, assumes the ecumenism presupposition. St. Hilarion also talks about it. Very, very true. Christians that lack essence, energy, distinction have a Gnostic-leaning presuppositional framework. Those are a lot of complicated words, so I'm just going to say yeah. A massive emotional appeal for ecumenism. That is what a lot of this video has been so far, and it's pretty depressing. Kesog Sosina says, "Not of this world" was the OG. Okay, so the original was not of this world. So you want to find that one. And if you're in our Discord, we'll help you find it. If not, join our Discord. Max says, "A pagan is not a heretic. A pagan is an infidel." What is going on? What's going on is sleight of hand. This is where they, that this is how they get. These are you're the mark, and they're going to scam you out of your money. That's how this works. Basically, is that this is they switch one thing for the other, and then you get falsehood instead of truth.
Theology and history and spirit-filled reflection happen among the saints and fathers. Beginning with Saint Augustine and the very church of Carthage, Saint Cyprian's own church, specifically addressed this and said, essentially, no, that's not right. Saint Augustine, viewing Saint Cyprian's ecclesiology, said, while very well-meaning, the saint conflated the validity of a mystery with its efficacy. And because he didn't employ that distinction and just essentially focused upon whether whether it was real or not, it's actually not helpful. And so in council, in synod, this is a really Orthodox council in a lot of ways. It foreshadows a lot of the big Orthodox statements about headship in the church and everything else. In 419, when Carthage assembles all of the bishops of Africa, they essentially tell the Pope, by the way, the copies of canons you've got with the Sardican appellate canons appended to the canons of Nicaea, this is not correct. This does not give you a universal appellate jurisdiction over the African church. And frankly, you are wrong about Apiarius, this troublesome cleric that had appealed to Rome at the time. And they essentially tell him this is sort of inviting Roman worldliness and politics into the governance of Christ's church. They also say, why would a single man have more wisdom than all of the bishops assembled in council when the Holy Spirit is promised to us?
Yeah. So one of the I was just going to say the Council of Carthage in 257, which was chaired by Cyprian, is what's often pointed to. But what is not mentioned is that the decrees of this council, specifically on this issue of baptism, were reversed by three subsequent councils of Carthage: 345, 397, and then 419.
But what about the other council canons on baptism that are in the rudder? Are you going to address those, or are we going to ignore them?
Which we're talking about now.
Right. I think it's Canon 68 of 419 that specifically says, this is the theology of the council. Very few canons really sort of explain the underlying theology. A lot of it we do have to sort of infer and model out, how does this apply? Sure. Why does this apply this way? They spell it out for us. Donatist baptism is true. It's the true and saving baptism. It just doesn't save you. That's why it's not repeated, though, upon joining the Catholic Church. And that's, that's what we begin finding in councils all over the place, including the Orthodox West, which is often ignored. But the Orthodox West really, really treated this issue. Saint Vincent of Lorraine, in his commonatory, which speaks about how do we find what the church teaches if there has been no general council on the issue. We look for these things. We look for authority, antiquity, consent.
I love the fact that they are referring to the consensus of the fathers, but at the same time, absolutely not using it
for regional dispersion and over time and that kind of thing. We look for consensus because even spirit-filled men, even the saints of God, even the deified, are while they're in this life, they're prone. They can err, and actually God even allows it. He says.
Yeah, and that's for those that may not know, that's often called the Rule of Saint Vincent. And another thing I want to point out is I think it's Canon 57 talks a lot about this, and Canon 57 of the Carthage Council in 419. But I have some other figures here, and this is what I find so fascinating. A lot of times people want to disregard the West entirely, and I think this is a categorical mistake. In my own research on the resurrection of the body, when speaking about transgenderism and people that have chosen.
Okay, I'm oh boy, I'm first off, as you all know, we're great fans of the Orthodox West here. I don't know how this gets into transgenderism, though, but I guess we'll find out.
Chosen to cosmetically transition, so removing organs and such. I had to rely a lot on the Western Fathers because it's the Western Fathers that talk about the bodily resurrection in detail, as opposed to what we would get maybe from Origen with a slow dissipation of the body over time, or what we would see in Nyssa with a kind of sexless resurrection. So it's a real mistake to discard the Western Christians and just to pull some of those out. Of course, we have Saint Stephen, so Pope Saint Stephen in 258. We have, and stop me if you want, but I want to, if you have a commentary, but I want people to know what the evidence actually suggests, because you're not going to hear this if you're only listening to certain sources. You'll
Well, and I would
probably hear
recommend
about
just sources.
I really hope he's going to talk about baptism and not gender.
No, there's Ancient
Yeah.
Insights.
Ancient
who's
Insight. That's
fantastic.
amazing.
I believe
Yes.
it's his name is Ben as well, and he is he's just brilliant. I believe he goes by
Mhm.
Codex Justinianus or something like that.
Yes.
His website really has done a lot of the deep work. He references a great set of modern Russian theological writers that
Mhm.
have compiled
Yes.
some of these patristic quotations too. There's a great scholar that has done work on the actual opinions within the rudder, named Peter
Yes.
Peshkov,
Yeah.
who's just brilliant. And he
And we should
also
talk about that too, because the rudder
Sure.
itself is presented as a monolith of opinion, but really it contradicts itself on this issue.
Yes.
So
does.
let's talk.
We can stop here. The rudder is the canonical commentary of the church for 900 years. To refer to it as contradicting itself just shows true and abiding ignorance of what the rudder is. If you have not gotten a copy of the rudder, I highly recommend getting a copy of the rudder online. I have made reference to it. It's available in our Discord. You can find it on Scribd. You can find it anywhere. I recommend the Master John edition. The rudder is going to become the most important book in the World Orthodox trad movement in the next couple of months once Father Peter Hears reprints it. Before he does that, which I assume will have some yes actually commentary, just get the rudder online. It's not hard. It's meant to be read by lay people. It was always meant to be. Don't listen to these guys putting themselves on a pedestal and treating it like it's some hidden book from Indiana Jones or something. You can literally read it. Get a copy. There's even a printable version of it on Lulu. Just, don't be afraid of the rudder. But what he's talking about is a practice can change over hundreds of years, and then the church does or reverts to another practice. That's not a contradiction. It's how history works. It's just ridiculous.
We should talk about that, because that's also something that people are not going to be told if you're just listening to one side. Also, let me tell you, I'm going to put Ancient Insights, some of his articles, in the description. So if you're looking for those, go ahead and click there. But the rudder itself, and that's how far along is that? Is that 1800s?
That's right. It was published or promulgated, maybe initially in Venice, by the Ecumenical Patriarchate. So it's a late collection of the canons of the church, sort of the magnum opus of the great Athonite scholar Nicodemus of the Holy Mountain. It's from what little I understand of the topic, but there has been this scholarship on this extremist opinion that the rudder does espouse, that actually at least one part of that spectrum that perhaps the saint did not participate in, that it was actually the opinion of the
wait, did he just say the extreme opinion that the rudder did espouse? It's our textbook of the canons. There's no extreme opinions in it. It's literally just the collections of the canons of councils with commentary from St. Nicodemus, which was following the other canonical commentators. Wow.
Patriarchal censor and theologian Vulismas. And this was one of those things that the correspondence has been uncovered between the saint and Vulismas on the issue. And part of it, I believe, is because the saint was aware of the very long-standing practice of the Russian church that was, based upon holy synods that had assembled themselves based upon the decisions of the four Eastern patriarchs. And so, it's, to me, I think one of the worst things that can happen for a newly converted, minted Orthodox person, especially a young man, is to get his hands on the rudder.
100%.
Hey, I know that I was wondering about that. Why is the title of this "How Rigorism is Deceiving a Generation of Orthodox Young Men"? Like, why specifically young men? I don't get that part. And now he just brought it up again. And of course, the worst thing that could happen to a young man is touching the rudder, because you'll get a disease or something. Anyway, let's continue.
I think it should be a work that is not approached by many. In fact, you shouldn't even read about.
You shouldn't even read about.
Bother. Just pray.
Don't even bother. How dare you?
And this comes from someone that has read the rudder in its entirety. But just to put it into perspective here, and we've already discounted in a way the apostolic constitutions for the rigorist position because of its meaning about the word heretic. It
Ooh, we
doesn't
have
actually prove
charts.
anything. You go from the Council of Laodicea, Canon 8, in 363, all the way, from what I understand, all the way to 1755.
Yeah.
1400 years without getting another rebaptized thing. In the meantime, you have Pope St. Stephen, 258, Pope St. Sixtus II, who was, I believe, his successor, St. Dionysius in 264. You have the Ecumenical Council of Nicaea in 325, Canons 8 and 19. You have the Council of Carthage in 345, which we talked about. You have St. Basil in 379, who says, we don't rebaptize because of acrivia. So because the canons say it, acrivia literally.
He's being dishonest with St. Basil. St. Basil wanted to baptize certain heretics and not baptize other heretics. So, again, even his little chart here is not completely honest. He has St. Mark of Ephesus there because St. Mark of Ephesus actually demanded for stricter practice because they were originally taken in papists by confession, and then he said they must be received by chrismation. And later that would be changed to baptism. But no, none of this is as clear cut as he's saying. He's trying to imply that this stuff here is all opposed to this stuff. And that's not really what's happening. You have to look at each individual case, look at each individual canon, and you should read the rudder. He actually puts the rudder in the rigorist, but that's funny. This is the canonical law of the Orthodox Church, and he's put it in the rigorist position. So I guess he has no wow. I guess maybe he just advocates for anarchy.
Is the word of the canon. Economia is laxing it. So St. Basil, this distinction between economia and acrivia, to say that it is economia to chrismate is actually opposite of what it actually is. It's acrivia to chrismate, because that's what the councils say. And that's in 379. Look at...
It depends on the situation. St. Mark was applying acrivia with chrismation also, but that's not always... Economia and acrivia or strictness are applied against, you have the norm, and then you apply strictness. The norm is baptism. Everybody is supposed to be baptized. That's what the gospel says. The question is upon whether baptism of heretics can be recognized, etc. So this is complete misframing and not totally academically honest.
Canons, Basil's Canons 1 and 47. And then you have Constantinople, the first, 381, right? That's an ecumenical council. Look at Canon 5. You have, again, another Council of Carthage.
Wait, what did it say in Canon 5 of Constantinople? I'm going to start fact-checking him because he's starting to make me mad. Give me just a second while I pull up my handy-dandy online rudder, because everyone should have one. So let's go here, and let's open this up. The handy-dandy online rudder. Give me a moment while I switch screens so we can go to that. And let's see here. Present. Stop screen. Present. Share screen. Window. The rudder. Dun, dun, dun. Okay, so all we have to do with this handy online edition, which, as I mentioned, you can get from our Discord. You can get it on Scribd. It is free. Is you just have to find a page that has an index somewhere. So it's usually on the earlier pages. So you go to like links, table of contents. Okay, maybe I hit the wrong table of contents. No, not the topical index. The prologue to the canon. Here we go, canons. Okay. So the Council of 381, which would be if I remember correctly, the Second Ecumenical Council, was it? Yes, it was, I believe. What's it say here? Okay, that's for the First Ecumenical Synod, Second Ecumenical Synod. And we're going to go to Canon 5 and see what it says. Okay. Maybe I'm wrong. Was there a council in between and I've forgotten? Council of Constantinople, because this doesn't have anything to do with baptism. He's just like throwing it out there. Give me just a second. Yeah, Council of Constantinople. Yeah, okay. Was it the Second Ecumenical Council? I have to question myself at this point. Yeah, it is the Second Ecumenical Council. So this is Canon 5 of the Council of Constantinople, As concerning the tome of the Westerners, we have accepted also those in Antioch who confess a single divinity of Father and Son and Holy Spirit. What the heck does this have to do with baptism? What does this have to do with baptism? Oh, let's check the Council of Carthage while we're at it. Let's go back to an index. Topical index. Okay, links. Regional Synod, Carthage. That was, let me see here. He just says Council of Carthage. It doesn't say what it was. Well, where? Neither of those are in the rudder, but what is he doing? Okay, well, let's look at that one. Let's look at Carthage. Canon 57. It's a big book. You see, we're over 1,200 pages in. That's why they don't want you to read it, because it's big. Give me just a moment while we continue on to Canon 57. Council of Carthage. Let's see if we got this. This is the right one. Doobity-doo, doobity-doo, doobity-doo. Like, I wonder what list he must have got this from like a book, like a list in a book that the guy just put in some canons and said this is... Okay, here we go. It is decreed that it is not permissible for persons to be rebaptized or reordained or for bishops to move from one see to another. Accordingly, it is further decreed that the one who refused to obey the mild reminder offered him by your holiness and let the unpardonable error be corrected shall forthwith be deprived of the office with the aid of the civil authority, and if the form of the procedure has been kept, he shall not be accorded a trial by synod. That to me seems strange. I don't want rebaptizing people or reordaining people. What does St. Nicodemus say? He says, the present canon commands that neither persons baptized by Orthodox ecclesiastics shall not be baptized a second time in accordance with Apostolic Canon Apostolic Canon 47, nor shall those be ordained by Orthodox prelates be ordained a second time in accordance with Apostolic Canon 48. So nobody's arguing this. I'm amazed. I'm just amazed. This is like a really fake section, and I'm like just dumbfounded by just this presentation. I wanted to give this the benefit of the doubt, but this is not really honest.
Rome, 420. St. Augustine, 430. St. Vincent of Lerins, 445. You have the Council of Chalcedon, again, ecumenical, Canon 14. You have Pope St. Leo the Great, 461. You have St. Fulgentius, 533. You have Pope St. Gregory the Great, 604. St. Isidore of Seville, 636. You have the Council of Trullo, and we'll come back to that because I know that comes up. You also have St. Theodore the Studite, which you mentioned. You have St. John of Damascus in 665, who basically says rebaptism is a re-crucifixion of Christ. You have St. Teresius, which I think is 9th century. He's of Constantinople. You have the canonist Zonorus in the 12th century. You have the canonist Balsamon, Patriarch of Antioch in the 1200s. St. Mark of Ephesus, 1444. These are not small saints, people. You have Council of Constantinople in 1480.
Not small saints, people.
Moscow. Philaret in 1633. You have the Council of Jassy, the Confession of St. Peter of Moglia, 1642. Council of Moscow, 1666, 1667. You have Council of Jerusalem, 1672. You have the Confession of Dositheus, Decree 15, 1672. And then you have the Council of Constantinople in 1755.
Which is immediately dissented from by many bishops within the Greek Church itself, rejected by everybody else beyond the borders of the Ottoman Empire, deeply critiqued by canonists.
I'm so glad I was able to speed that up. That just made me feel so much better.
Saint Nicodeme Miloš, the Serbian Church, Archbishop Nicodeme, who was this brilliant canonist who said this was provoked by the Latins had gained this huge party within the Patriarchate of Antioch. This was a reactionary type of thing, and completely rejected.
And you also have St. Theophan the Recluse.
That's right.
Talking about this, which is interesting because he's one that the rigorists like to pull out for different things. It's very interesting because you see these figures when a point, and I don't want to assume malintent. That's not my...
I'm okay with assuming malintent because you keep on presenting it as a binary, which is not what the situation is. It's the church can decide whether to use, economia or aquavia, and you're basically saying that it has to be one or the other.
That's not my opinion here. I think everyone has the best intent in mind, but you do see rhetorical sleight of hand, and it is not scholarship. You can call it scholarship, but it is taking bits and pieces from different saints, to prove different points to build an entire system which seems foolproof and seems completely, and I've said this before, black and white. It's easy to get your mind around. The reality is anything
Like your chart.
in the church is not easy. It never has been. It never has
That's
been.
right.
I mean, and then, we have, go ahead.
I was just going to say St. Theophan the Recluse is very explicit about this topic, especially with respect to the Latins, that we not only recognize their sacrament of baptism, but their priesthood. And this is the opinion of the 1903 synodal response of the largest Orthodox church, the Church of Russia, pre-revolution, the most powerful and influential and most learned, the one with the most seminaries, the most monasteries and everything else. Their official statement to Constantinople itself is, we believe in the sincerity of their faith in the most holy Trinity. We don't baptize them because they are baptized. We believe in their priesthood. They preserved apostolic succession. This was their official.
I really need to see this letter. At this point, I don't believe a word they're saying.
Synodal response to Constantinople. So it at least is an acceptable theological opinion. That's what our opponents must, those on the other side of the issue must accept it as a genuine, valid theological opinion. It remained.
Well, I don't accept your opinion as a genuine and valid opinion, considering the stuff that we've seen already: misquoting canons, misciting, implying that the church's position is rigorist, and even putting the rudder in the list of the bad guys, telling people not to read the rudder, particularly young men. What's with the young men thing?
And uncontradicted by the four Eastern Patriarchs, the Apostolic Patriarchs, when the largest Orthodox Synod answered them officially that this was their position.
And it is important to note this because on the one, and this is something that I think is also part and parcel of the rigorist approach, is that it's presented as the Orthodox approach. And essentially what I'm trying to get across,
a complete approach is the Orthodox approach,
specifically in this conversation, is that there is a lot of evidence to the contrary, even if the loudest voices online. And Orthodad of 5, Zach here, has, if you want to follow him on Twitter, highly recommend that you do. I've learned a lot from him, and he's posting actual sources and actual citations, which you don't always see from the other side of, if you want to say the aisle, the aisle. And it's important to recognize that this presentation of the rigorist position being the Orthodox position is really theologically, academically. I've been criticized for saying academically because, of course, the only thing that matters is charismatic elders. Sort of a nasty little jab there, I guess. But
you're right,
academically,
the way they've framed the issue. And the way that I sort of imbibed this initial extremism on my own was, here's the position of the liberal academy. Here's the position of the people that are selling out orthodoxy every day.
Yes.
And here's the position of, the holy monks, the ones that are levitating, the ones that are healing, the ones that are prophesying. All their entire position is this. It's not that way. And when you sort of cross that boundary and you realize, no, the traditional position is actually the opposite of what this very late, very controversial, very illogical opinion is. Florovsky even, he's trotted out, even the old calendarists love Father Georges Florovsky. I'm probably butchering the French form of his name, but
I would say they have a mixed opinion of him. I wouldn't say that they love him, but he wrote some useful works, but he was an ecumenist at the beginning.
Florovsky is this, he's an intellectual giant. Everyone sort of likes to enlist him, but he's very, very critical. He's one of the ones, he's a Russian that believes that the church should sort of undergo a re-Hellenization. He does not stick to the economic theory. He says that's the most
Western captivity. We've heard it. The
wilderness of gracelessness exists just beyond the canonical boundaries. All the more reason the church cannot compromise. Not only that, he asks, whoever gave the church the ability to abrogate a commandment of the Lord for salvation?
Yeah.
If these people are not baptized and have nothing, how much more of a reason is it to not, delude them into thinking, no, you already have that, so don't worry, just come join us. That's ridiculous.
Right. So can you?
Well, I want to. Did he just basically admit Florovsky agrees that people who come from the heterodox should be baptized?
Canonical boundaries. All the more reason the church cannot compromise. Not only that, he asks, whoever gave the church the ability to abrogate a commandment of the Lord for salvation?
Like baptism.
If these people are not baptized and have nothing, how much more of a reason is it to not, delude them into thinking, no, you already have that, so don't worry. Just
which is exactly what the ecumenists have been doing for the past 50 years.
Come join us. That's ridiculous.
Right. So can you validly hold the opinion? I had a conversation with someone, and they were under the opinion that you could validly believe that You need to be baptized in the Orthodox Church in order to be a part of the church.
That's how it works.
But still said it doesn't contradict that some people are brought in via chrismation and their sacraments, if their priests are valid. To me, it's a complete logical. It's the law of non-contradiction. It's a contradiction to say you cannot be in the church unless you're baptized by us, and then to say, but sometimes you can't.
The church can use empty forms. This is like so what he's really doing is he's trying to set up his straw man for failure so that he can say we should recognize all baptisms. Either that, or I'm just wow.
And on the most extreme side, which I believe I'm afraid that some are championing today.
Yeah,
you know, it undermines really even the whole existence of the hierarchy. You know, when you know historically that Latin dioceses even have been received wholesale, uniates, you know, under the conquest of Catherine the Great, this huge populations of former uniates just appealed to become recognized.
Okay, just for a second, just for fun, just a moment here, because uniates, we're talking about uniates. Okay, let me see here. All right, let's see here. Nope, that's not it. Let's try this one.
The teachings
Unions.
of Vatican II.
Clearly, these are unions. Unions.
Will you come and follow me if I but call your name? Will you go where you...
No more. I can't take any more of that. I'll put these guys back on because that was just terrible. But when they say uniates, they don't mean uniates. They mean what we just saw. They mean these modern dance masses, people jumping in pools and calling it baptism, and that's what they mean. It's all the same.
By the Russian Orthodox Church and become canonically subordinate to her. Their monks, their priests, their bishops, their laity, and they were not received by anything other than a signature.
Yeah.
If if the super rigorist position and these bishops went on to help co-ordain, today's
super rigorist. It's not just rigorous. You know what? I need a mental break. I need a mental break. All right, guys, let's read some comments. Oh boy. Wow, this is terrible. Okay, let's see here. Where are we? Okay, so Max wrote, why people say, avoid the canons if you're a layperson. Where does that come from? That's a very common attitude in my church experience. Don't know amongst the true Orthodox it is. It is absolutely not. Every priest at a minimum knows the rudder. A lot of the lay people know the rudder. Our experience with the rudder is completely different. We use it for governance. It helps us understand the church's rules. No worries. You'll probably buy both. Yeah, hey, compare the two. I that would be worth doing. Don't worry. Yep. Okay. I guess that's fine. Everyone types badly. So do I. I don't need the rudder. I have the Book of Concord. Oh, okay. No, Father, we'll read it and see we're lying, and we can't have that. No, they should read it and see we're lying. That's what we need to do. I respect the effort, but this section feels like he's just name-dropping saints. That's why I put it at double speed, which I discovered I could do. Throwing stuff in the wall and seeing what sticks. Yeah, absolutely. Why do they always accuse you of what they do? It's like dealing with liberals, but worse. It could be both, actually. It could be they're dealing with liberals and it's worse. A certain man with a funny mustache once said, if you control the youth, you control the future. So that might be the deal with the young men. I feel like this is a shot at Ben Cabe. I mean, it is a funny mustache. True Orthodox is not the loudest online. That's Jay Dreyer, and he's cringing. Okay. Not sure what that symbol is, but We'll figure it out. Ethan, the Orthodox Right has it in their file share. The Orthodox Archive has it in their file share. Highly recommend that site. If you haven't been there yet, go to theorthodoxarchive.org. On the book On the Reception of the Heterodox into the Orthodox Church by Uncut Mountain Press came out after this interview and addresses all these claims very thoroughly. And I haven't read it yet, but from what I've heard, it did, and that's part of why Ben Cabe is so like mad and angry. Yes. As well as unedited Father Seraphim Rose, just another reason to go to the Orthodox Archive. Sometimes they're stupid, sometimes they're evil, sometimes both. I can't tell with them. That is fair. What was that? Oh, I was just looking for a collection of some modern crazy Roman Catholic masses because these people want to pretend that we're chrismating people who are coming out of like the Unia, and you know they know all the proper chants of the church, and they know how to do the sign of the cross, right? None of that's true. They're just like lying. Ethan, I found it. Thanks. And ultra rigorist, super rigorist. I like super rigorist. That's my favorite one. But ultra rigorist, these are great new terms that we can use. Ultra rigorist, put them together in one word. Super rigorist, ultra rigorist, because it's like superhero names. I am ultra rigorist. Okay. I watched that whole video once of the unions. It was painful to watch it call stopping. Yeah, I had enough. I meant a certain Austrian painter with a funny mustache. Well, yeah, Hitler had a funny mustache, but I mean, I think his is funnier. Okay, let's continue, and almost done with the suffering.
Right. Does that mean that the church itself, in the most extreme form, if you're going to take it reductio ad absurdum, if you're going to take it by its strict logical consequences, that means that even though they're saying we do know where the church is because of the physical bounds of the Orthodox Church, that even contradicts itself because we don't, based on who was received what way.
Well, not only that, I'll give you one more. The most absurd thing is they can't ever be even confident that they were correctly baptized. And here's why.
Well, they can if they actually do it in the Orthodox form. But is it just me, or does it look like this little speaker thing, like little hands and feet keep popping out when he's talking? It's really distracting.
The opinion of the rudder, right? The opinion of the rudder and the exomologatarian is that laity don't really properly baptize. Now, parents who don't baptize their infant before they die are penanced in the exomologatarian and the canons of St. John the Faster.
Come on, man.
But the commentary, which is an 18th century or 19th century commentary, is, well, if the infant lives, then they must be received by baptism because what was given to them isn't really like the same thing. Yes, it's that rigorous. Well, if you have a bunch of people who themselves were not validly baptized, or brought in under the wrong method of economy in this rigorous position, then made clergy, even if they're ordaining, and they become a part of the apostolic succession themselves.
Wait a second. Okay, first off, I've actually had some experience with this particular rule in my own personal life, so that is interesting that it was brought up. But he just said something really goofy, which is, okay, the exomolitarian basically says that if the parents they're penanced if they don't baptize their child before they die. That makes sense. If their child is dying, remember, this is written in the 18th century, you can't even call the priest. You'd have to go running through the village and find him. You baptize the child. That is enough, but it is not a proper form of baptism by itself because there's no chrismation, it may not have been full immersion, etc., so on and so forth. So, but then he says, and then this person becomes a priest, etc. Wait a second. If this person lived as a child, then he would have been brought to the church to be baptized properly. So they are creating an entire fictional, situation that would never actually happen.
This happened, centuries and centuries ago. That perhaps the people that they've ordained are not really priests either. So if they have baptized you, you have no reason to really believe that you are actually validly baptized by a validly ordained Orthodox priest. It undermines, at its root logic, it undermines the whole concept of apostolic succession in the sacraments.
Well, and it undermines exactly what they're trying to preserve, which is to know where the church is.
That's
or
right.
Where the efficacy of the sacrament lies. So the issue here that we would run into, you can deny it all you want, but straight down the pipeline from this rigorous position is Donatism. And
Yes.
Donatism!
I think we see this with St. Augustine's response to Cyprian.
And Donatism is really just, in its modern form is old calendarism and that kind of thing. It's the same arguments. We're the pure church.
Yes.
These people are hopelessly compromised, and only we have the valid mysteries.
Well,
And old calendarism does this other thing that Saint Nicodemus did not, to be fair. In fact, I've read that Saint Nicodemus, one of the reasons that he was canonized by Athenagoras was that he's very clear, Saint Nicodemus is, that heretical hierarchs who are not condemned themselves still dispense the sacraments, the valid grace. And unless they are themselves defrocked, they validly ordain, they validly confect the Eucharist and everything else. And the belief of the old calendarists is as soon as a hierarch or a priest believe something that they have deemed heretical, like the calendar change is valid, even if they themselves are on the old calendar, if they're in communion with the new calendarist, they themselves lose grace. It's like this vanishing electricity power game to figure out where the power remains. And I think it's a perfect recipe for despair. I think it's one of those psychological things that's based upon this dire need for certainty that ultimately doubts God's love, and doubts the promise that Christ gave to the church.
Wow,
I'm going to
in
pause
full
for our
agreement with you
moment
there.
of Donatism as we move to Canon 15 of the First Second Synod, which I have been pointing out ever since I learned the word Donatism was a thing as opposed to Donatism. But let me pull that right back up. For those who are familiar with my debate on this, you will have seen this before, so I'm just going to show it to you again because I'm a bad person. Anyway, so we go to Canon 15, and what does it say at the end if they leave? It says, but as for those persons, on the other hand, who on account of some heresy condemned by holy synods or fathers, withdrawing themselves from communion with their president, who, that is to say, is preaching the heresy publicly, teaching it bareheaded in church, such persons not only are not subject to any canonical penalty on account of their having walled themselves off from any and all communion with the one so-called bishop. That's a long sentence. Before any synodal verdict has been rendered, but on the contrary, they shall be deemed worthy to enjoy the honor which befits them among Orthodox Christians, for they have defied not bishops, but pseudo-bishops and pseudo-teachers, and they have not sundered the union of the church with any schism, but on the contrary, have been sedulous to rescue the church from schisms and divisions. So I'm still on the fence with schism. I know it can be pronounced two ways, but people really get on me for that. All right, so let's get back to our heroes, and let's take this off of the screen here, and let's bring us back to these wise individuals, and
we wind up getting more of an invisible church than Protestantism.
Yeah, and it's one of those things that the church really does need to address as a whole. And even the Greek church in 1875, they were sort of perplexed by the differences themselves. There was a patriarchal commission at that point to sort of figure out, the varying approaches and that sort of thing. And they sort of left it with, we need to have a council on it. And I believe the Pan-Orthodox Synod attempted, at one point it was on the subject matter list for discussions and it got removed, unfortunately. But it's one of those things that really does strike at the heart of ecclesiology and sacramentology. And I think it's so important.
Why do we not have this problem? I mean, I hate to say this, maybe I'm being rude, but among true Orthodox, this isn't really a problem. If you've had an Orthodox baptism, you're baptized. If they feel there may be a question about it, you may be chrismated, but most of the time you're just confessed, or sometimes you're chrismated. Chrismation can be repeated. I've just never had the problems that they're having here. All this clutching the pearls and stuff. I don't get it.
And it can really. I know several people that were validly received, and then they sort of get the rigorist bug and they get correctively baptized.
The rigorist bug.
So one of the questions that I've
seen super rigorous
from catechumens looking into this issue, which I wish they wouldn't, but is why is it?
You wish they wouldn't look in the rudder either.
Well, according to the Holy Fathers, I mean, it's a sin. It's a terrible sin. We confess one baptism for the remission of sins, the single spiritual rebirth.
Wait, did he
It has
just
to do with,
did
you know,
he just
the
literally
finality.
say that basically he just jumped to like it's a sin to get baptized Orthodox when you have a heterodox baptism? I've heard people I disagree with who are more they're more economic with chrismation, etc. But I've never actually heard someone say it's a sin to baptize someone Orthodox.
Of Christ's sacrifice. It's wound up with all of that. In fact, St. Philaret's Catechism, which enjoys incredible authority, both by virtue of its official sanction by the largest Orthodox Church in the world, also by its centuries and centuries of use, uncontroversially, says that the clause in the creed that says, "I confess one baptism for the remission of sins," was added at the Second Ecumenical Council specifically for this reason.
For Roman Catholics?
Because there were communities separated from the church by erring belief or by willful schism, who nevertheless worshipped the Holy Trinity and retained the sacramental understanding of baptism itself, and were not to be baptized as a result. Why? Well, read St. Augustine. Christ is the performer of the sacraments. You know, when a priest exercises his priesthood, it is Christ's priesthood. He is our great high priest. So, you know, we're not looking at the human realm when it comes to the action of the sacraments. Now, that can be to our condemnation. That's the logic of St. Augustine, is that
Right, but that was even assuming they had identical forms.
these aren't saving in heresy and schism, precisely because the unity with the church is lost. There's the unity of the Spirit and the bond of peace. When the bond of peace is broken, the unity of the Spirit is there. There's certain, the mysteries are a signification of this sort of vestigial unity with the church, and a promise and a token of future return. But they don't do what they're supposed to do until they until the community or the people in the community are reunited with the church.
So two things. What you're essentially saying, and what I've seen in the canons of the ecumenical councils, is that as the church of the 7 ecumenical councils, the Eastern Orthodox Church, as the canons proclaim, as the second part of the Nicene Constantinople Creed was added in 381 to combat this idea of essentially rebaptism, because we have one baptism, that the church has already spoken on the issue conciliarly.
Yes. That's
and
right.
Those are recognized ecumenical councils, much different than the council in Carthage, the first one with St. Cyprian, much different.
So they're literally arguing that heterodox baptisms are all baptisms. This is their argument, guys. Just remember that. In the end, that was the argument.
Different than the later councils in 1755 and such.
That's right. That's absolutely right. And, you know, if people understood the position that the poor suffering Greek church endured at the time of that promulgation, you know, this was a church just laid waste to by the Turk and the rapaciousness of the bureaucracy. These men had to bribe their way into office and then continue to pay until such a time as the Ottoman throne needed more, taxes levied, and then they would dethrone them. They moved them around like pieces on a chessboard. This is, and while that doesn't affect the grace of the church at all, it should give us pause to reflect upon the men that were able to conjure up those sums and sort of play the bureaucratic game. These were not necessarily the greatest and brightest theologians of the church.
In other words, the people who wrote the Oros of 1759 were poor idiots who basically got their offices through paying Muslims and just decided to baptize Roman Catholics because they're retarded. Okay, got it.
It just wasn't. I have nothing but sympathy for that period of the church and all of that, but we have to be honest about that period of time. And I think Archimandrite Ambrose Pogodin's piece on it is does really good in sort of
that piece, by the way, is a pro-chrismation piece, just so you know.
Explaining that. Runciman's Great Church in Captivity also is really well written. And
the Great Church in Captivity, it mentions that, but it's mostly a history book.
Yeah, but I do think that, just as Orthodox lay people here in America trying to navigate how to live an Orthodox life, one of the worst things you can do is start, divining canons for yourself.
Don't read the rudder warning again.
Thinking that every little mistake that a bishop makes somehow affects, our ability to be the community of Christ. If the church weren't more robust than that, it would have perished long ago. And, we're sort of pampered in America in a lot of ways.
Yeah, I can tell. You even have to, fight for your heretical baptism. Hold on. Let me just put this back. And I don't know how to change. How do I change that? Okay. Let me see here. I am now declaring myself super rigorist. Okay, there. So let me just put me here so we can continue, and hopefully
in the 21st century, we've got the faith. We have such a richness of theological learning and reflection, and but the American society is sort of the Protestantism factory. In a way, it's we want to have all the information immediately accessible to us. We want to be entitled to our own opinions.
I'm amazed at the amount of pauses that it is on double time. This is kind of amazing. I can hear it perfectly, and he's going at double the speed.
And that's a really difficult thing to sort of let go. I think in like just being an American Orthodox person is you think, well, see, I've read all the same things, and so I'm entitled to my own opinion and that kind of thing. And combine that with the fact that, maybe as an Orthodox person, you continue to struggle with, your sinfulness, with your laziness in completing your prayer, or yet another fast. And, you begin looking for answers, and well, you know what, maybe the bishops were actually wrong in how I was received. Maybe that's the whole issue. And I do think that there are especially young men that, really thrive on that, the idea that, no, that's liberal. This is the based opinion, that kind of thing. And that's an illusion. It really is. Just, that's what I've found anyway.
Right, and a spiritual detriment too. It can be dangerous to one's spiritual life because it reintroduces a kind of disparaging of your own salvation. And so the second thing I wanted to ask you was, what would you say to someone that says, look, if we admit baptism outside of the church, then we're no better than the invisible church theory of Protestantism?
Right. Well, that's just not the case. The sacraments that have been maintained by certain communities reflect on the fact that their origination, whether it's first, second, third, fourth hand, is from the original Orthodox Catholic Apostolic Church. Mm-hmm. This is a token of the fact that they have legitimate goods, but they're stolen. But they're a token. When the church spoke in council in Bethlehem, to ratify the confession of Josephus, they didn't speak of it even as an error to rebaptize. They spoke of it as an abomination.
Mm.
And that's because it's the church itself that emerges from the baptismal font and the grace of Christ.
I'm not going to open up Jerusalem. They've been wrong on enough stuff that I just don't take them seriously at this point.
And to sort of believe that there's this sort of mystical inner church, it really is a form of this of Protestantism. Here are the spiritual elites, and everybody else, they're just sort of these heretical compromisers. Well, that doesn't mean there aren't erring people in the church. Doesn't mean there aren't spiritually ill people in the church. Thank God that there are.
So, like, open heretics versus, we've gotten to the point where they basically want you to say that if you can't recognize Orthodox baptism, I mean, how could you possibly know where baptism is at all? It's just, this is bad.
Spiritually ill people in the church. That's why we're welcome. We're welcome to come there and receive healing from Christ. That doesn't mean there aren't ecumenical excesses and that kind of thing. I myself, I'm not a fan of, when bishops get together and they sort of sign off on silly things that make it look like we have a unity that we don't. But
you mean like ecumenical agreements? Okay, my brain's had enough for now. I'm going to take a quick break. You go to sleep there, Ben, and let's get to some comments. All right, so let me see here. Okay, I left the comment on the screen. Wicked Wally wrote, I'm partial to coconut donatism, as am I. I am a big fan of the coconut donatism. So I do like Boston cream donatism as well. Actually, I really prefer Bavarian cream donatism. But anyway, didn't certain fathers from that period refer to Donatus and his followers as Donatius and his followers as being schismatics, not even heretics? Yes, they did. Also, is coffee included with the Donatism? Yeah, I guess. I mean, I guess if you are a Donatist, you would also be a coffeer. Okay, because the charge of Donatism is to imply we have a different. God, I'm starting to say Donatism now. The charge of Donatism is to imply that we have a different heresy, ecclesiology, heresy. If people are nitpicking you on a word, Father, do what I do and make up a new one to bother everyone. Well, I have, and that is why you can see that I am now listed as Father Joseph, the super rigorist. And that is intentional because being that the super rigorists are, very important to include. I'm going to put them back here. Okay. So yeah, it's let's see if new way of saying it. Yes, he said I don't think they know what sin is. I have questions whether they know what baptism is at this point. Don't insult the people that came before you, my dude. Have respect for your elders. Yeah, well, that's not what these folks do. Just a random question: are there any icon sellers you would recommend? I don't have any. I mean, frankly, I'm a big fan of a lot of different icon sellers. I don't have a particular preference. I mean, most recently I've recommended Skeet.com just because of the size of their selection. And they also do prints, so you can actually mount icons yourself, and it's a lot cheaper. Let me see here. I don't see any more comments, so let's put this doggy to sleep. Okay, that's not how I wanted to close that.
But the church isn't going away. That doesn't necessarily make a bishop an apostate. Anyone who can read Mark of Ephesus' words to the Pope Eugene IV at Florence, I mean, he spoke to them not even as brothers, but as fathers. Before he.
Wow. Okay. Look, using a title in a council as opposed to how Saint Mark regarded the Pope, it's just wrong.
Realized they were resolute in their heresy. He came with absolute optimism and hopes for unity, and he was willing to sit down and dialogue. That's a part of the church from ancient times.
Right.
Okay,
so what about these conversations?
Medieval time. It's technically medieval times. It's the 15th century. But anyway,
well, people have on Twitter, maybe not the best forum, but can be used appropriately. What about these conversations and people maybe that are want to have good faith conversations, where in many cases we don't find a reciprocal adherence to the Socratic means of dialogue?
Well, that's a really good question. Well, as a recovering, rigorist myself, Twitter can be really, really useful, in finding sources and that kind of thing. But it's also, it's one of those things where, golly, I think it's because of the shortness of the format and the sort of psychological concept of a public audience that it really is a temptation toward, triumphalism. You're not really seeking the truth. You're seeking to score rhetorical points. Meanness is sort of rewarded. We live in an age where, I mean, maybe I'm showing my age. I just left my 30s, so I'm not this young blood anymore. This is a different thing. But a lot of the people that sort of like the chrism isn't even dry, and they've decided I'm going to be a teacher in the church.
Yes.
And they
well, they find out that in some churches the chrism isn't even chrism.
Right. They host their own discords, and they boot anybody that like dares dissent from like the minor opinion that they've got.
Yes.
That's like it's really sad on the one hand. On the other hand, it may be a symptom of the fact that the church has to get its act together in terms of a unified witness and really speaking the language of 21st century American people that have deep spiritual questions.
Well, we even have, especially, please.
I was just going to say, especially for young men.
We even have priests that the chrism is barely dry, and I don't want to disparage that, but this idea that there's a rampant clericalism in the Orthodox Church on the rigorist side, which is essentially saying, look, if you're not a priest, you can't talk about this. Your opinion doesn't matter. When in fact, we're actually pointing to priests and bishops all the way down the church historical line. Like, these are not our words. These are not our words that we're pointing to, but the fact that you can have a priest whose chrism is barely dried, someone who was brought into the church in the middle of the pandemic and barely saw the inner side of a church, and then, did a online 1 semester, 2 semesters of some sort of seminary, and now teaching as a priest, and in many cases themselves saying, these people aren't ordained, so you don't need to listen to them. They just want division.
It was, right. And
people fall for it, though. That's the thing. People, it's wild to me.
And the whole idea
St. Paisius wasn't a priest.
That's right. And there's in Russian they call it. I'm
gonna kind of speed through this prattle because it seems pointless, and I don't see if there's any value to it. But okay, we'll keep going and finish this off.
Call it young elderism. That these priests that they they've read like, Frederica and Metropolitan Callista's Ware and, a couple other things online, and they think they've got a pretty good hold on everything. And now they can tell you how many drops of water to drink and like what your prayer should be. And that's frightening. And we don't actually know what level we're supposed to be at right now. I think it's just a commonality to sort of have this really exalted view of your own spiritual capabilities and in our culture and everything else. And it can be very, very harmful. In Russia,
I find it interesting that they're making fun of younger priests.
Had to correct. They were elders like, telling people whom to marry and people that had never met one another, things like that. And people just sort of blindly obeying in faith, saying, well, no, this is what this person had told me and that kind of thing. Just terrible ideas.
So how did you get out of
terrible
this
ideas?
View? I mean, for the most part, and this is something that I also want to draw out for people that are maybe not on the rigorous side, but find themselves coming to blows, more or less, whether it be on Twitter, whether it be in person, whether it be via whatever, that people that are taking this opinion, they haven't lived their whole lives yet, man. Like they can still discover, just like you yourself have. You fell into it at an early age in Orthodoxy. You're now almost 2 decades in from a prior conversation, right? Like you're not a youngin. You're not a youngin in the faith, and you did have
2 decades. He just get past his 30s. He went into Orthodoxy in college. He's been in Orthodoxy less than 10 years. I would recommend Ortho Data 5. Try to find a church to go back to, a true Orthodox church, because if this is the guy you're listening to, you're going to have more problems.
How many years were you kind of in this position?
Oh, golly, at least a decade. At least a decade.
That would be your whole life. How old are you?
If not an old calendarist sympathizer, at least someone very, very skeptical about the future of the Orthodox Church itself. And maybe we were going to just have to retreat into the caves, and that really no bishop was trustworthy and that kind of thing.
How can one be skeptical about the future? If you're skeptical about the future of the Orthodox Church, you believe we're in the apocalypse. The church must always have bishops. You would have to think there are no bishops left. Then you should move to a cave, or go in a bunker. You'll learn.
It's just internet orthodoxy can be a really troubling place. And I'll mention here, so by way
internet orthodoxy
of public repentance, although I personally repented to him before, one of the first people I met to sort of challenge my rigorist views was a young seminarian by the name of Andrew Stephen Damick.
Oh boy.
He and I back in the day on LiveJournal really threw some heat around on these very topics.
This tells me he's closer to 40 would be my guess, if not over 40. LiveJournal was something that I was using, and I actually was an early person who used to edit on Orthodox Wiki until a bunch of people had me thrown out. And that's basically the end of my talking with Father Andrew Stephen Damick. But
he was right all along. I'd like to publicly say that. And he's an amazing priest. And God grant many years to his ministry. And I just so much of it is fueled by pride and deep spiritual insecurity.
Yep, we're just full of pride.
Coming out of it,
insecurity.
Some of it is living life. Some of it is just being committed to the consensus of the fathers. When you admit that someone illuminated by the Holy Spirit can be mistaken, in fact, there are many.
If you're looking for the mistakes of the fathers, you're doing consensus wrong.
Many things that say that, not simply theological works of the Orthodox saints and the theological heavy hitters, but even hagiographies where that speak of this concept that very holy people can be mistaken.
Yes,
when you accept that,
they're
you accept the fact that that's why we go for consensus. When you read a couple of the ecumenical councils and that kind of thing, the acts of the ecumenical councils, where you see the sausage getting made, so to speak, the political involvement and the genuinely holy people there and that kind of thing.
But not the rudder. Read history, guys, but not the rudder.
When you maintain that commitment, you're going to find now, thankfully, especially now, because of the sources coming out, especially from the Church of Russia and by other people that maybe don't fit in with I hate to say this, but just sort of sociologically, like anything from St. Vladimir's when I was in my rigorous days, it was just immediately suspect to me.
As it should be. It's still terrible. A lot of it is actually terrible.
Anything from Paris from the 30s to the 90s,
some more heresy. Yeah, it's still bad.
From the Institute of St. Serge. I was not going to listen to it. I knew it was suspect.
You're so free to read it, but you put it up against the actual teaching of the church, and you'll see it is suspect.
And that's just not the case, because the same school that sort of produced Sergius Bulgakov, it also produced Vladimir Lossky and Florovsky and people like that. So
really, once you say Lossky and Florovsky, you run out of people. I mean, I know Elder Theodore spent a short amount of time in the St. Sergius Institute, but not very long. and most of the other famous people of the St. Sergius Institute, unfortunately, were kind of the builders of the future OCA and the ecumenical movement in America.
Some of it is just living life and realizing as you go to vigil that having all the right opinions about something actually isn't going to help. You overcome your sins and passions and really meet Christ. Not that I'm much farther along that way, but I've realized that the things that matter, the things that are most really relevant to like an Orthodox layperson, the study of the scriptures, finding the patristic commentaries on the scriptures themselves, and the books that are practical about living a spiritual life, and a good dose of church history will also help, I think, because you see like the church, God has seen fit to put his treasure in these jars of clay, in these vessels of clay, in earthen vessels. The church is divine and human, and when you see the human side of it, and nevertheless you see that no, it doesn't get eclipsed, even when it can look like it's going to just be overcome by error. God preserves it in every age.
Okay, that just sounds like fantasy. The reason that the church was preserved from error was through the actions of those holy people to stop heresy. I really wish people would stop treating it like it's some sort of like heresy, like it's some sort of cloud that just falls on the church and then everyone's deluded and then the cloud goes up and everyone goes back to normal. That's not what happened. Why do people believe in these ahistorical fantasies?
And so I would say read the things that are going to connect you most to Christ, and not give you headaches about some online Twitter war, and stop being obsessed with being right, and be careful, because you're going to find a lot of opinions. Orthodoxy, is a world religion, has hundreds of millions of people in it. You're going to find a spectrum of opinions. Not all of them are going to be the sanctioned opinion of the church, even when that person with that opinion has a mitre on or a scuffia or whatever. You just
It's all so tiresome. I mean, really, it's like we know that people make mistakes in the church. But when we're talking about heresy and we're talking about ecumenism and modernism, it's not so similar. Arianism or Nestorianism. When someone starts preaching that, your job is to leave. It's not to be like, oh, it'll be okay. I don't understand. This is what's the word? This orthodoxy that they preach is flaccid.
just or lives on sacred real estate that doesn't give them a license of infallibility. It just doesn't.
Was there a major turning point when you had to say to yourself, oh, I think maybe this last 8-9 years of the way I'm thinking, was there a turning point, or was it a gradual thing? And if so, what was that?
Yeah, I can't really pinpoint like a major turning point other than meeting holy people who did not share the same rigorist opinions. That was a big deal.
How do you know they were holy?
Finding saints that didn't was huge, especially Saint Theophan the Recluse. I mean, to me he's sort of one of the patrons of like the spiritual life, in the sense that you have Unseen Warfare, this classic. You've got The Path to Salvation. You've got the spiritual life and how to be attuned to it. You've got his commentary on the 118th Psalm. You've got his thoughts for every day of the year. So, I mean, this is a gifted preacher of repentance. This is someone that, in no uncertain terms, is not a liberal, and yet here he is, willing to engage and even see the best in heterodox confessions. There was
I'd love to see the citation for that.
portrait of a Western nun that he was a real fan of. I believe that I think it conveyed like the seriousness of a monastic postulant to him. I read that the Optine elders, many of them were conversant in later French theologians, as well as the Holy Fathers. You find
So it's been heard of the
who takes the archbishop's
elder,
the Anglican archbishop's little portable altar and venerates it.
It's like they look for every diplomatic action, every artistic interest that they can find of a saint to defend their ecumenical heresy. It's painful to watch. It really is.
This is a wonder-working elder. I have a book of the miracles of St. Philip of Moscow. This was a healer and an exorcist and a biblical scholar who believed that the economic theory was ridiculous. So when you have like not simply like, one category of saints that may, have been mistaken because the academic theology was X, because of, the so-called Western captivity and that kind of thing. No, you have miracle workers. You have people that...
The Western captivity was really more a mental creation of Florovsky than anyone else.
That knew Greek. I mean, St. Theophan, the recluse, knew Greek.
How weird. It's almost as if the Western captivity wasn't real.
So yeah, all of this stuff, and specifically the rigorist attitude, just opinions aside, the rigorist spiritual state, it's actually not, I don't think you can actually maintain it for very long without, because pride does disperse the grace of the Holy Spirit. You find yourself
Who is this?
Voluntarily humbled. And I've certainly been that many times and places in my life. And that will, if you have some ears to hear and some eyes to look up at that point, you can change. And you realize
This is insulting. Like, ultimately, there's absolutely no reason to take this seriously, but he's like basically now just saying the rigorist, and I'm assuming he means the true Orthodox. He doesn't mean Father Peter here. He means the true Orthodox in general. Are basically, their spirituality is destroyed by their, believing in a lie and blah, blah, blah. And it's like, you know what? We don't really know how long you were there, where you were, who you were with. We know nothing. We get conflicting stories about your age and origins. It's just, I feel like this is a lot less honest than I really enjoyed. But
realize what's important is often not going to be, someone's internet presence. It's being a dad. Do you pray with your children? Do you mess up in front of your children and then do you apologize to them? Things like that. Those are the biggest things that make a difference, and that God Himself prioritizes. And I know that's probably really trite to say, but that's
it is really trite to say.
That's true.
Zach, this conversation has been
amazing.
So interesting to have, and I would love to have more in the future if people have questions
what an honor
and they want
for you to listen to me and ask me these things, because it's deep stuff and it's not easily unpacked. So I'm really grateful that you gave me the platform and asked me these questions. I'd love to talk more either on this.
I don't know. I thought it was pretty easy to unpack.
Yeah,
platform or elsewhere.
Both. I think both is absolutely necessary. And if you're watching, listening, have a comment, a question, you can actually reach out directly. I don't know, he's a father just as I am father. And so as he has time, at OrthoDad5, I think is your handle. Is that correct?
That's right.
Yeah, on Twitter. So OrthoDad5, I'm following him. I think his commentary on things and really the spirit that you approach the conversations with is really helpful and informative for me in learning how to use that platform appropriately.
Wow. We're going to go through the last round of comments. Give me a moment. I'm just need my brain to just kind of get back in its spot. All right. Let's go through the last round of comments we've got so far, and then we will call it a night for the first of these live reviews. Okay. Wi-Fi Viking writes, holy people get things wrong. Put a tick in Stay Lutheran column. No, take the tick out. Become Orthodox. And whatever, not Ben Cabe's Orthodox. Kazog Sasena, I really hope I'm pronouncing that correct, says, because they really don't read history, they read quotes. Absolutely right again. Sava says, people want anything but repentance, so if heresy is just a cold you catch and it passes, it takes repentance out of the equation. Also that all that talk, I mean, we do talk about the church, spiritually can be seen as a hospital, but I feel like they take it to the next level. And they do that, they couch things in medical language for that reason. Because they want to avoid things like sin and repentance and original sin and Augustine and don't mistake kindness for approval. Very true. Melanchthon knew Greek. A lot of people knew Greek, and a lot of people knew Latin. People don't understand that when we think of the modern era, 100 years ago, Latin was taught in schools, and in many cases, Greek was taught in secondary and college education. A lot of people understood Latin and Greek in the Western world before 1910. So the idea that this is some sort of even 1930, you could still find people even in public school learning Latin. So the idea that like all these people didn't know anything, the Western captivity, just so much goofiness. Reader John says, "Your blessing, may God bless you." And I will change my banner because I'm no longer the super rigorist. I am now mega rigorist. And so let's continue here. Sorry, I'm late. Was out of town. You don't have to apologize to me. I hope your trip went well. If he does, Kessler says, if he does mean Father Peter, then he would have a breakdown over the true Orthodox. Well, apparently he claims, if you watch the beginning of this, he claims to have somehow been part of them for a while, but it's not really clear how long he was or whatever. Yes. Father bless, thank you, may God bless you. Reader John asks, why do these guys always sound effeminate? I don't know if I should answer that. Thanks for the video. Ethan Wright says, interested to see more of these live reviews of videos. Yep, that's we're going to be doing. I'm probably going to try to do one every day until we run out. Let me see here. And while the church is a hospital, but as a patient, you need to accept treatment. That's absolutely right, Saba. That's exactly the point. When we're talking about the church as a hospital, the treatment is repentance. The treatment is prayer. The treatment is confession. It's not like, just like, oh, I'm sick of Arianism. No, that's not what happened. It just makes no sense. And then, let me see here. Kessler says, I don't trust him to be telling the truth on that. Fair enough. And he said he was with the ROCOR prior to the Anschluss when they were with the HSIR. That made him true Orthodox. People in that time, many of them considered themselves true Orthodox, and they followed through with it when the union didn't happen. So that's it. It's just kind of a tragic situation. One would think, had the union never happened, would that show have even aired? I mean, he'd probably still be in his ROCOR parish and everyone would be happy and all that fun stuff. But who knows? And we don't deal with the would haves, we deal with the what has been. And so finally, give me just a moment here. I'm just going to quickly put here. Oh, wrong thing. I will be doing a video about needs because we are getting into that season where we do have needs, and it's not about buying presents. But in any case, just to close up, again, since 2004, NFTU has been reporting on events related to true orthodoxy as well as underreported events relating the greatest heresy of our age, ecumenism, a global web of interreligious syncretism in which the hierarchy of world orthodoxy is now inextricably meshed. When we began this page, we never thought we'd be in the middle of a global war for the salvation of souls. But things never work out the way that we plan, and now I'm going full-time to expose ecumenical heresy where it can be found, help Orthodox Christians find their way home, and do my part to stop the globalists from fulfilling their plans of one-world religion, the religion of Antichrist. But today we need your help. Subscribe and support us at nftu.net, on our Subscribe Star, or on Odyssey. Keep watching. We're just getting started. Everybody, there's one last comment. He already lied too much. Very true. Have a good night, all. May God bless you, and we'll see you next time. In the name of the Father, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Enjoy your night.